Hey kids, in today's video we're going to go over what I like to call is a good problem to have, and that's what happens when multiple groups want to use your Power App. So in today's video we're going to go over a way to have one Power App but talk to multiple different data sources on demand. All right, let's go see how that works. All right, so this video is not going to start in Power Apps because we need to do a little bit of work first. But let me set the stage. So in a previous episode, I did the event calendar. And now the actual production version of that calendar, turns out, got a little bit of attention. And multiple groups wanted to use it. But that put me in a weird spot because, well, it was rigged up for one data source. It was purpose-built, like a lot of the apps we built are. And so multiple people wanting to have their own version of the calendar posed some problems because, well, they weren't going to be on the same site. Now, of course, the Power App can be put wherever, and that's fine, but the data was going to be in two different areas. And the last thing I really want to do is have multiple copies of the same Power App just in different spots. It's inefficient. I mean, updating that would be a nightmare. Even with Azure DevOps, you just, it was more than I wanted to do because it was going to be making multiple copies of a production app. And that was just kind of a non-starter for me. So I had to figure a way to make the Power App more data agnostic. Now, of course, the Power App has, one cravat is the data itself is going to be structured the same, right? So let's just go ahead and put that kind of over here and say yes. But it's going to be on different sites. And so I had to find a way to have Power Apps look in different areas on, at runtime. And so it took me a little while, but of course, Power Apps can't do that. That's no big surprise, but Flow can. And so what we're going to do today is use Flow to go get our data and then return it to the Power App. So the Power App itself, at least for this example, will have no data connections at all. We're going to use Flow for that. So what I want to show you first is the data. So at least set the stage of what we're looking at. This is going to be extremely simple. I'm not going to convert the event calendar, but I am going to show you kind of a very simple, generic way to do this. And what we see here is, now I only have the one site set up, but I have two different lists. Same thing will apply. We'll just, you'll see how we're going to pass this in and how you'll be able to apply it. So, like I said before, the one thing that we have to do is make sure that the data itself is the same. One thing we're not going to worry about is site A, data structure A, site B, data structure B. All right. So we're going to assume, if we look at the event calendar example, that it's a calendar, right? So the data is the same. So what we're going to have here is we have two different lists built the same way with different data. So we see here site one list data, a single line of text, a date, in the title. I mean, we're not doing anything really scary here, but I want to show you how we're going to just use the different data sources. So, if you're playing along with the home game, let's all imagine these are on different sites, but we do have two lists. So site 2 list data, same structure. In fact, I just made a copy of it and then change the data. So we see here the single line of text data and the dates are different between the two lists. All right, so that's how we're going to be able to tell that we're in the different areas. So what we're going to need to do, though, is convince Flow to go ahead and get data based upon some input. And so the idea is the Power App, we're going to pass in our data location via the query string. So we're going to have our param look at different values, and one is going to be the site name, and one is going to be the list name. Well, at least the site path, and then the list name. And we'll take those, pass them to Flow, let Flow go get whatever data we're looking at, and then pass it back to us in a JSON structure. And then we're going to use the new parse JSON formula. Yes, it's experimental, tread lightly. But we're going to use that in the Power App to structure our data and then use it within the app. All right? Yay. So the first thing we're really going to need to do, though, is build the flow. And what we're going to see here is our early flow with nothing in it. Now I have a Power Apps V2 trigger. I like that one better, so we're going to use that. And we're going to need two inputs. We're going to need the the site path, and then we're going to need the list names. Let's go ahead and add those in here. Both are text. And we'll do bing, bing. All right, we have that. Let's go ahead and do some variables. Now, I'm going to go ahead and fast forward this part and explain what it is, but I like to have variables that hold all the information I need. So give me a minute and I'll get those in. Okay, made 3 variables. One is the site URL, and it's going to be a string, and I preface it with my tenant URL. This is for simplicity, but in all honesty, we're going to be in one tenant, so this part I can go ahead and hard code because that's really not changing. And then we're going to assume that what we're sending in will be after the slash, but so sites slash and then whatever we send in. The list name itself is another string. That's going to be purely passed in as a list name, so that's going to be blank. And then I'm prepping my output, which will be the list data. So we have these 3 that are coming in. Now, why do I have lists? Again, that's not going to be blank. That's the list name. Why do I make variables for things that are being sent in from Power Apps? Well, I've found that if you have to replace the trigger, it's easier to have the trigger data in variables than to have it scattered below, because if that gets replaced, then you have to rebuild all your flow. So this kind of future-proofs it a little bit. Anyway, so we have our 3 variables, and we're going to use this now as the get SharePoint items initializing values. Okay? So let's go ahead and get that step put in. And we are going to just go ahead and custom value this one. So our site URL and our list name. And so, like I said, this makes it generic, right? We don't have a whole lot we can do here because it is what it is. But this gives us a way to pass in a random site and list name. So next we're going to get our data. We're going to use a compose step. And we are going to so next we are going to get our data organized, and we're going to use a compose step. And we are going to come into our expression, and we are going to use the JSON function because we want to return our data in a nice, neat structure. So we're going to use JSON. And in that, we are going to take the value of, oops, let's just go ahead and do that. Copy, go back to expression because Flow is hating me today. So we're going to JSON this, get the outputs of our get items, and convert that into JSON. Okay. Of course it's not. Gotta make it a string first. And there we are. That's really it. We need to return this. Well, actually, we need to set our string variable. We're going to set var list data to our compose output. So we're going to respond to a Power App or flow. We're going to add our output. It's going to be a type text. List data. We're going to send in list data. All right, so there's our flow. We're going to take in a site URL and a list. We're going to pass that and get the items. We're going to compose everything, make it nice, neat, and send it back to Power Apps. So let's do a quick test. Okay, our flow runs. Let's take a look at what we have in the data. Paste it in Notepad off screen. Let's take a quick look. And we see we do have item 2, item 3. So we have our data back from flow. All right, so now that we know our flow is working, let's go put this into the Power App and get it ready to go. Okay, so we have our Power App in place, and first thing we're going to do is going to go ahead and get in our on start. And this is really where all the magic happens, so let's go ahead and get this going. So Now I said before we were going to make use of the param function, which of course gets a value from our query string. And so when adding or referencing this Power App, of course, now you're limited to, you're not going to be able to select it from the Power Apps list. And it does also limit it in terms of use in the mobile, but it does allow for embedding into a page, which is where this example kind of started from, and then also direct use if you provide a link. All right, so that is one limiting factor here. So let's go ahead and get it started. And so the first thing we're going to have to do is establish ourselves some variables. So what I've done is I've put in just some very quick and dirty use of the variables. And what we see here is I have one that's going to catch the site URL and one that's going to catch the list name. Now, you have to have some way to trap what happens if the app is loaded without the proper query string. So in this case, for the sake of testing, I just did some simple isBlank, then I will set them to a default value, and this will help us in testing. But in the production app, of course, you're going to have to fail the app right here. Give a message of, no data, no list data provided, something to that general effect, because essentially without the query string parameters, if you don't have a default list, of course your app's going to break. So you just want to make sure that you have something in place that catches the worst case scenario of someone randomly going to your app. All right, we have that, and now we have to use it. And so that's going to be where we call the flow and get our data. So let's go ahead and, oops, I do not want to create a flow. I want to add a flow, get list data. So now we're going to, oops, not set, raw data to EP21, get list data run, and we need the URL, our site URL, and our list name. So there that. And we see here we have our raw data. We are calling episode 21 get list data, and we're passing in our URL. So again, you know how Flow works. So we're going to go ahead and just get our raw data. Now that is going to come back in JSON format. And this is where we're going to have to tell SharePoint, we're going to have to tell Power Apps what to do with the data. And that's going to use our new friend, parse JSON. So let's go ahead and get that set up. Now, quick primer, what we're going to do with the data. We want it in a collection. I want it in a collection here. You do what you need to do. So we are going to start with everybody's favorite, clear collect, call list data. And now to put this together, we are going to for all, so this is where this goes, make a table of parse JSON var raw data dot list data. So this is the return variable. So for each a table from there, close. Now, parse JSON is really nice, but of course, parse JSON has no idea what's coming. And in order to take something in parse JSON, we need it in a structure, but we also need to define and type the incoming data. So let's say there's documentation on this, so we're just going to go through the example that we have. So if you remember, we had 3 columns. We had title, which is a default single line of text. We had another single line of text, and then we had our date column. So we're going to have to go ahead and add those in here with the type, and I'll show you how. So we're going to start with, we're going to name the columns as we want them. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and repeat them. So we have title, actually even better. We're going to do ID, title, and then the 2 ones. So we can kind of see everything here. So we have ID, and now it's a number. So we're going to have to type it with value, and we are going to okay, so what we see here, we have the value function, which of course will convert a string into a number. We have the value, which is coming out of this table parse JSON, right? So that's the value returned. And then we know the column coming in, which is ID. Now, IntelliSense isn't going to happen here because we don't know what's coming in. So you're going to need to know the names of your columns. title. So we're going to type this one, since we know it's a single line of text, to the text function. So again, now we have a type. Now we're going to have data item. Now we'll just do item value text value dot slot data. Now we're going to do date value value dot date data. So that works with the exception of capital T. And so this should give us the data that we were returning from the JSON, from the flow, converted back from JSON, put in the table, and for each one of those, we're putting it in the collection. Yeah, whole lot happening here. But now we have it defined. And so, if all goes well, we should be able to come in here, run on start, and we should have our data returned from flow into our collection. All right, we check our collections, and there we go. We see we have information. So we are going to go ahead and put a quick gallery in place, blank vertical gallery. We are going to tie it to that particular collection. We're going to put it here. All right, I'm going to drop in a quick label. I did make a quick change. I didn't like the fact that date value repeated a function name, so I added the from JSON. My apologies. Real quick, I'll show you what I did. I added from JSON here because I realized date value and date value was the same, and that's really not a good form. Apologies for that late change I did off camera. All right, we come in here, we see ABC. There's the title, so we're going to go ahead and move it over. Title, we have data, and then finally, oops, too soon. Date value. All right, so we see we have our particulars. Now let's just go ahead and drop this in and show that we do have values for site URL and list name. All right, so we see the data we have. So the next step is just to publish it, and let's go ahead and prove that the query string changes really do work. Let's go ahead and get that out. Okay, so what we're going to need to do, I went ahead and got my URL from the details of the app, and I went ahead and said, and just for the sake of shortening, we see we have our standard URL, the play, the ID, and then of course I have the tenant ID. I shortened it all here so we can see what we have to do. Now above that you can see I am looking for two particular parameters, site URL and list name. And so that will just be site URL equals, and then ampersand list name equals. All right, here we're going to put sites Power Apps test data and list name of site one list data. So these are the defaults that we're using, of course, which are going to be removed in production, but we can see here how we are passing that in. And so we will take this particular addition to the URL, and then we will add that to what we're going to put in the browser, and we'll see if we get different results. So we have a new tab. I'm going to go ahead and put in my particular with the query string for site one list data. We are running our app, and we see site one list data, Power Apps test data. So yes, those were the defaults. So to prove that we're working, we're going to take our secondary one that has site two list data. We're going to open that in a new tab, and we should see site two list data and site two's data come back. So one app, one published app that can be now just shared to anybody, and we will just call the data that we are hoping to use. Now, site permissions are all still handled via SharePoint in this respect, so there's no real worry about, hey, I can just figure out the URL change and see somebody else's data. So as long as they don't have rights, or smart to figure the pattern out, that we now have the ability to just via the query string send in different data values that will then have Flow go get us something unique. So I hope that's helpful. Apologies for the long delay between videos, but if you have any questions or comment, please leave them below. Hope to hear from you. If not, I'll see you next time.